Welcome to Chandwell. My name's Michael and I'm building a commercial high street for my N-gauge rundown town layout Chandwell, set in 1993. After making this little building last week, I have now added the first two shop fronts to High Street. Here's a look then at using layers of paper to make shop fronts. There are 20 buildings on the layout so far, but only one shop front. T&C Bakers was a modification of a scale scenes kit, and I like how the whole shop front was constructed in layers. I decided to follow a similar pattern for my two new ones. I drew the layers in the free drawing application Inkscape. Because N-gauge is so small, I don't have much scope for adding fancy embellishments, but these two fronts are going to be basic and utilitarian anyway. Each frontage comprises the glazing, the window frames, a base to support the windows, a decorative surround, and the name sign. Behind all this goes the door, and then a basic interior, which is just a photo from the internet. And for good measure, I made some basic signs to hang in the windows. I printed the whole lot onto photo paper, but the window frames were printed onto sticky label. Let's put it all together. Some pieces, like the sign, will need to be thick, whereas some, like the posters, will need to be thin. I roughly chop them into thin, thick and thicker parts. And then, using basic PVA glue, I stick the thicker parts onto an offcut of the same paper that they were printed to. For the thickest part, like the sign, I repeat this again. I'm left with a sheet of components where the signs are 3 layers thick and the door and frontage are 2 sheets thick. The interior and posters are still only 1 sheet thick. I make the main sign another layer thick, for good measure. I stick support shapes to 1mm card and then cut them out. I then glue the interior onto them. The interior curves slightly to help it blend in once inside the model. It's a tight fit, but it slides into place nicely on a bed of PVA glue. I line it diagonally in the end, as this seems to suit it best. I doubt that very much will be seen of it anyway, once the posters are in the window. Using a fresh scalpel blade, I cut out each of the other components. It's important for the thicker elements to keep the scalpel straight and perpendicular to get the best squared off effect. I'm left with a little set of delicate parts which now can be stuck on top of each other to make the frontage. It's clear to see the various thicknesses, and because it's smooth photo paper and not rough card, the edges are crisp and tidy, which will be important later. Using a thin bead of PVA glue, I carefully add the decorative surround to the base. And then I add the sign on top of that. I use my ruler to help press it all together. And this is looking good. I'll worry about the white exposed paper edges later on. I used some thick acetate that I saved from some packaging box of some kind months ago. I stick the tiny door frame to the acetate of PVA. The window frames are printed to sticky label, which I then add to the acetate. And then I use my usual sticky label method to crisscross them with the scalpel. And I pull away the parts that I don't want to expose the glazing underneath. I also stuck the posters to acetate as a way to seamlessly mount them in the windows, but I changed my mind about this later on and I wished that I hadn't. The door was cut out and stuck behind the main glazing. The 2-layer paper door frame is just subtle enough to make the door appear slightly recessed. The frontage has white edges where the components were cut from the paper. I used cheap watercolour paints and a fine brush to carefully paint the edges in a colour that matches the signage. The colour does not have to match exactly, as the eye can't really differentiate much at this tiny scale. At this point, I'm only painting the parts that border the glazing. I'll do the rest later. The frontage, with its painted inner edges, is then glued onto the glazing. I didn't want a visible layer of acetate on the outer edge, because my watercolour paints would not cover it. So I cut the acetate smaller than the frontage, and then built up around it using tiny strips of paper and PVA glue. I was going to mount the posters on another layer of acetate and then hold that in place behind the windows, but I thought in the end that it would just be easier to tape them into place. So I arranged the posters in the windows and then placed a strip of clear tape over them to hold them in place. This looks okay, but it wasn't my best idea. But before I realised that, I trimmed away the strips of paper packing and then finally painted all the edging red with watercolour paints. Not bad. This sign is just 4.5mm by 4.5mm. It's 4 layers of paper thick, and the edges needed to be carefully painted red too. I used PVA glue to carefully fix the frontage into the building and tweak it into place. Filming the beauty shot, I realised not one but 2 glaring mistakes. This poster, offering great odds between Chandwell Athletic and Milton Wanderers, has been hung upside down, and my use of tape to hold the posters in place has resulted in some bubbling that I didn't spot, and it ruins the overall effect a little. I could spin a story about the hapless work experience lad, but I decided to take the Chandwell approach and just board over it with a bit of plywood. The bubbles in the windows though, I'll have to live with, and I won't use that technique again. The other shop front was done in the same way. I cut out a tiny set of mannequins stuck to 2 layers of paper. I painted the background in the same colour as the shop floor, and then ran some dark grey around the exposed paper edges. Stuck to a little base of card, they give a convincing 3D look to the inside of Fashion Focus. I really enjoyed making these, and I think they suit the overall feel of Chandwell quite well. If you like them too, please give this video a thumbs up, as this will help others to find the video as well. I'm moving my attention to the road surface next, and I'm wondering how I'll convincingly make it look like High Street vanishes into the distance behind the bridge. Here's a look at the last time I tried to do such a thing. Please join me next time then to see how I get on with that. Until then, thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.